crowdfunded board games have come a long way. What used to be, garbage games that were only good at crowdfunding that all the big reviewers would make fun of and be like, I don't like those campaign games and those games that came out on crowdfunded stuff. And, all of that is kind of gone now. And we know that there are actually really good games, some very legitimate games that come out on crowdfunding. There are also still those indies. Those people that are just making a game that is rather niche, that is a little bit different, that maybe is pushing an envelope or doing things in a different way. And they don't always have a big business, a big marketing, a big push to get the limelight. That's where the discoverability comes in play, which means Kickstarter and GameFound. Now, GameFound just recently changed their UI and UX, or kind of the whole look, especially of their front page. And I think it highlights one of the problems crowdfunding has nowadays, and one of the problems, almost an insidious problem that's inside of all of us when it comes to crowdfunding. So let me go ahead and talk about that. Okay, so here is the main page to GameFound now. When you first come in, right now, obviously, I have the United States here, and I don't know if your location or language changes too much. I kind of doubt it. For the most part, it's probably how this is. And there's some changes. So one of those is this featured, right, which shows at the largest image you'll see on here is these four. And this kind of cycles through a few. The featured, I don't know if it's the advertising thing that you can pay GameFound for to kind of get more limelight. Perhaps it's that. Then you have a spotlight here, and your spotlight here kind of shows some interesting things like campaign funded, right? Or new project launched, or, stuff like that, right? Or maybe they announced the launch date. So they have some of these, which is nice. It's up on top. It's pretty small. And it still fails to talk about one thing I'm going to talk about. So if we scroll down, you're going to see the same games over and over again, right? So now here they are again in this one, and then here they are again in this one. This is fine. When it comes to discoverability, it's not too bad. I especially like the late pledges one. I'm glad that we've stopped the focus of back now. There's a lot less of that, I feel. Feel free to correct me if you think I'm wrong. When it comes to that FOMO of like, only now. Now, we still get a lot of that. But even still, it's not like when the campaign's done, you're done. Like the late pledge is often just as marketed as some of the like live campaigns. And honestly, that's kind of nice. I like the fact that these aren't just 2 weeks, and if you were there, you got it. If not, too bad. So that's kind of good. This right here, this is what I want to talk about. I kind of alluded to this in my previous video where I first announced this overview. And by the way, if you're not subscribed and you want to see videos just like this where I'm critiquing the industry, feel free to subscribe. I do that all the time, as well as cool board game stuff, unboxings, reviews, discussion points, whatnot. So with this, we have 2 top 10s. Now that's kind of interesting, right? Not too bad. We got a top 10 by funding. In other words, what's making the most amount of money, right? And this is, I think, a rolling 7 days, right? Last 7 days. And you can obviously filter it, right? And there's categories of stuff if you want to see, what about the RPGs or whatever? And then there's by audience. So there's how many new people have they gained, right? So often it'll be just recently launched or just recently announced stuff, right? Like Heroes of Might and Magic 3, Terra Escape, Kemet, right? As they get backers or get followers. That's cool. I get it. I like it. And I think it highlights stuff that, people may have not seen. It's also kind of interesting, right? When you see stuff like this, where like Nemesis Retaliation, last 7 days actually made more than the newly launched Terra Escape or Kemet. It's cool to see pledge managers continue to gain lots and lots of money. Like it shows that if you do things well, you can totally do that. And that's awesome. It also kind of shows, hey, what's coming up that might be exciting. It might be kind of interesting. I kind of like that as well. One of the problems with this is, first of all, I think it's a little limited in what it's showing. And second of all, it shows a focus. What I would like to see is a top 10 almost funded, right? If there was just a third one here that's like, hey, these are close to funding, but they haven't quite made it yet. Go in and give it a day delay, because obviously then anything newly launched would be on there, right? So this would just be like, hey, after a day of launch, if you haven't funded yet, you get on this list. And if you're the closest percentage-wise, perhaps, to funding, then, you get that. So, almost there. Help them right over the hump. this is a problem with the industry at large, right? From a coverage standpoint, a lot of channels are very focused on views, on either doing things for a business deal or doing things to gain as much views as possible, right? So often they cover the popular stuff. That's why most painting channels paint Warhammer, right? It's the same kind of thing. And so if you're not focused on that, like, it's why I'm so thankful for the fundraiser, which again, I had an update in a previous video, link down to it in the description below. Or my patrons, for instance, like, those help me kind of keep going. And the fact that I don't have to pay my mortgage with this, that I don't have to, feed my kids based off of the funds from YouTube. So I can cover some of the more indie stuff that I know won't get as many views, and that's fine. But even regardless of that, of like, just really pumping views to the stuff that's already getting a lot of views, right? Which is kind of what this is, right? It shows our tendency to only want to deal with great success. It appeals to the idea that success means the highest funding amount and not the fact that the game was made. I've talked about this a lot, where I feel like it's a problem that our indie board games need to be mass produced in China, and that's the idea of success. That's the funding. That the only path forward is mass production with a high 1,000+ count of copies made in China and then shipped globally around the world. When it doesn't have to be that way. Success can just mean my creation was made. Success can just mean, hey, these 500 people got this, more customized game that was made without mass market appeal. One of the reasons Hate stood out to me so much from Come On back in the day was because it wasn't viable at retail. That it's not a game or a theme that does well at retail. Monolith makes a lot of games that wouldn't do well at retail just because, like, their core experience is 2 giant big boxes, and it doesn't work, right? There's a few flukes, of course, and a few exceptions, but for the most part, either interesting themes, right, or interesting mechanics, or I guess just to say unique, or just non-mass marketable. It bothers me that the focus is on, look how many thousands of people want this, look how many millions this has funded, as opposed to hey, these guys are almost there making their dream and you can help them across that. And that's the discoverability, right? What the problem with a lot of these here and these is, these already. They're the top 10 for a reason. Everybody and their grandmother's signing up for these. Everybody and their grandmother's backing these, right? Like, that is not necessarily helping you too much. And in fact, even with like the laurel around and stuff, it's like celebrating mass market on crowdfunded, which isn't exactly the whole point. Now, as a consumer, I don't necessarily care that a company is doing something. If people find value in it and they're able to buy it and fund it and they get a better deal of it, I don't much care. I'm not one of those people that think no big companies should be on crowdfunding. I think that's silly. If there's value to the consumer, I'm all for it. If you want your collector's edition version of that game that's going straight to retail afterwards, totally fine by me. Knock yourself out. I've been there. I've done it even. If it's something that's interesting, that's what I want. I've bought plenty of games on crowdfunding that are going to retail, often in even the same kind of shape with maybe a few promos or something. Totally fine. I can understand wanting to support a company, fund a company more directly, all that kind of stuff. I get it. I do. But I think GameFound and Kickstarter and any company that has not a storefront, but a place to discover new things should be focused more on those that are still working to get there, right? It's almost like an indie highlight, right? Where it's not indie as in the indie that's also making $3 million on a crowdfunding. It's the indie that's almost at 40,000 and just needs that little bit more to do it. And again, that's, I understand, I comment on how like the 40,000 is because you need to, mass market stuff and, print it high volume and do all these steel molds and stuff like that. That's a whole separate discussion. I'm not getting into why the value needed is that much, or why success is cancel it if 2,000 people backed it still because it doesn't make enough for the 5,000 order I want to make or whatever junk. Like, I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying from GameFound's perspective, I would love to see a top 10 almost funded. I think that would be great. In fact, I think, Kickstarter started with like the project we love, and that's a whole separate thing now, but the idea is it would be great if GameFound could even like highlight an indie. Like, hey, here's a campaign that hasn't quite funded yet that I think is actually pretty cool. We're going to put them in the featured, right? So we're going to go up here, and the first thing you see when you visit GameFound.com is, oh, look at that indie campaign that isn't even funded yet. I have a feeling for this featured, just about every game you ever see here, every campaign you see here, is already going to be 100+% funded easily. And that's just, I think, going to be the case, right? And some of it's, again, the goal being fake. I get that. But some of it is a fact that the ones that are able to make it to featured are already the ones that are able to get a following, able to get marketing out, know how to do a business run well, and just overall are fine making a campaign, are going to be successful whether they're on the featured or not. Now, at the same time, I understand that things are popular for a reason as well. Often the case, it means it's a better campaign. It's more safer for backers. It's a better made game. There won't be as many hiccups, and there's nothing wrong with pushing people towards those. I myself have talked about this, right? That there are some campaigns that nowadays, if they're super indie, you got to worry, are you going to get your game? That's a legitimate worry backers have. And so they may not want to get to one that's barely funded or hasn't even funded yet, because if they're having issues just funding their game, how many other issues are going to have making a complex board game physically and then shipping it globally around the world, right? There's a lot of logistics involved there. It's very difficult. You need to be very strong with your business acumen to be able to do that. Do we trust them if they can't even really fund very well? So there's a push and pull, right? This is not the heyday of crowdfunding where, the indie darlings are doing well. Often they're delaying, they're unable to deliver, they have issues, they're launching other campaigns. There's a whole host of other things they're doing. So yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons to it, but I still think the people who want to make that and be like, I know this hasn't funded, I'm going to back it anyway, it's my money, I'll do what I want with it. We should be highlighting that still. The fact that we don't, the fact that we only highlight the ones that are getting thousands of new audiences every week, or the ones that are making almost €1 million every week long after their campaign, I don't feel like that is the celebration, the laurel, the number one we need to necessarily focus on. It just focuses on revenue. It focuses on quantity. And it doesn't even focus on the profit that we were hoping these people make anyway. People get so focused on the amount of backers they have or on that number that they've totaled, even if it's not profitable. And then we've seen cases of this before, right? Mythic Games made millions, but it wasn't profitable. The way they were running their business, the way they were doing things, they didn't make money and they actually had to close up shop. Same kind of thing here. It's not a proof. That's revenue, not profit. But they're so focused on that they'll sacrifice profit to do it. That they'll take the cut to get the more backers, to get the more revenue money, so it looks bigger, so they can be featured on GameFound, or they can be the number one in the by funding and the number one in the by audience, because that's where the focus is, both on the industry and from backers. Because we're often looking at that too. It's a focus because it works. Let me know your thoughts on all this. I'd be curious to hear what you think about that, and if there was any other way they could potentially highlight it. I like the almost funded, where people are close to being funded after the first day, and then have that be dynamic, right? If somebody funds, boom, they're out, and then they go to the other one. Maybe even celebrating a just funded, if it's not the first day or two. It almost rewards like a free advertising for ones that don't quite get there, right? Which is, I don't know, it'd be kind of interesting. But that's not the world we live in. We live in the one where things are funded in 2 minutes, where the amount of hundreds of thousands to millions that they're making is rewarded regardless of profits. We go in an area that we don't look into companies very strongly on who's running them, what their actual financial outlook looks like. All of that isn't looked at. Instead, it's just how many thousands of people are buying your game and giving you millions of dollars. Here's a reward. Now you get featured. Now you get on the top list. Now you're number one on the top 10. I don't know. It just seems like the wrong focus to me. It just doesn't feel right to me. And again, how helpful is this? How many people don't know about Nemesis Retaliation, that it has to be there at the number one? What does that even mean? What does that do for it? What does that do for you? I guess, is it new people? They don't have the new audience, the number one new audience. So people are either upping their pledges, or there's a few people going in at expensive pledges. Does this just drive expensive pledges or cheap pledges? One or the other will get you either the audience or the funding when it comes to ranking that top 10. Our company's going to be so focused to get to that number one in these top 10s that they'll start making even worse business decisions, start making even less profit, just to get that, thinking that that'll give them exposure and that the quantity will come, and once that happens, then they'll be okay. I almost don't want to see a campaign that I'm interested in be here, because it to me, and maybe I'm a little cynical, it means, oh, it must be a really expensive game, or it must be a really cheap game, right? Either you're getting all the people because it's cheap, or you're getting all because the more expensive it is, the less of an audience you have. Just inherently, there's less people that it's viable for. It's more niche. Or it's super expensive, but the people doing it funded a ton, right? Because it's just really expensive. I don't know. It's almost a toss-up. It's almost like companies are going to try and do a little bit of both. How cheap can we make it to where we get people in, but then how expensive can we make the whole thing to get it out? It's kind of like buying the game for $40 in a video game, but then spending $160 on DLC kind of junk, right? Like, is that it? Is it just expansion crazy, but a low core box? We've seen enough of that in crowdfunding, I feel. I've seen enough of it in crowdfunding, I feel. It's just the constant thing. How many, oh, you only have 4 expansions? Why didn't you 5, 6, 7 expansions? Why can't I add everything under the sun as an add-on? Why aren't you selling plushies? Why aren't you selling different play mats? Why aren't you selling different dice sets? Why aren't you doing all of this? Why don't you have 20 SKUs available for me to continue to buy, so the people that do it continue to fund it, and then your revenue goes up, up, and up, regardless of how profitable 40 SKUs is? It just, I don't know. I like that they're innovating. I like that GameFound is doing work. I think they need to take a step back from the business side of it. And I know this is a big ask for a company, but it's not a publicly traded company as far as I know. And if so, then I guess then they can be mindless. Though again, I don't think that's an excuse either. You can make money however you choose to. Either way, I think the focus is wrong. I think they need to calm down and really figure out, what do we want to nurture crowdfunding as a sustainable avenue going forward? And the prices that we are in now, and the economies that we are in now, and the global unrest that we are in now, how can we support crowdfunding to still be a great place to go? Is it just putting Nemesis Retaliation on the top 10 for the last 5 weeks? I don't think so. I don't think that's the answer. I'm not sure that's actually helping. I think we need to focus on a little bit more indie stuff, while still being smart about it. That's why I like the almost funded, because there's tons of indie stuff that's just never going to happen. They don't have the business idea to really focus in and sell their product to a market that actually makes sense, right? Some things just don't work. It's just not well done, right? Then maybe the quality's low. There's all that kind of stuff. I get it. But the stuff that's almost funded, I feel like typically is it's almost there and just needs a little help, maybe from GameFound, right? To show some people what it wouldn't. Maybe it's them picking a handful of stuff, kind of like a Project We Love kind of thing. That's how it originally was, where, hey, these are just a few things that we think you should see. This is highlighting something great on GameFound that not everybody's seeing. I just did a top 30, and again, it was kind of a loose thing around campaigns that people aren't talking about, because when a person just sees that a campaign only has 150 followers, they're not going to put that in a video on YouTube, because who's going to click on it for that? And so it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, whereas it doesn't get big because people don't see it, and people don't see it because it's not big. And GameFound's leading into that. I feel. And I feel the focus isn't quite there yet. Love that we're improving. I think there's always room for more improvement, and I think that would be further improvement. Something to do for indies that aren't just blowing things out of the water and doing amazing. What can we do for them? Let me know your thoughts on all that down in the comments below. I'd love to read them, love to respond. I always appreciate our conversations. Thank you so much, of course. Thank you to all of my supporters, or even if you just watched the video and left it a like, or even a comment, that does help a lot. And it helps me make videos just like this that are critiquing the industry, critiquing the companies, and not just the games. So that you know that it's not just the game has to shuffle too much, but maybe it's a bit too expensive, or maybe it wasn't made very well. You know, the stuff people don't talk about. Guys, thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye, guys.